Well, hey, everybody, welcome to Locker Room. This is Southland's podcast for men, where we're trying to talk about the right things in the right ways. We're trying to redeem men's conversations. Today, I'm going to have a conversation with myself. Technically, I guess it's a conversation with you, but you don't get to talk. You can talk back in your car, on your mower, wherever you are. I just won't hear you. So this is more of a monologue today. This is episode 4 of our current season, and we're talking about some hot button issues. In the first 3 episodes of this season were all on the matter of race. We've talked about race before on this podcast, but this time is with my friends, Aria and Rod. Hope you found those episodes helpful. And if you haven't listened to those yet, you definitely want to go back and listen to those before you listen to this. And even if you didn't agree with everything that we talked about, and I've listened back to it, and I mean, who knows? I may not agree with myself on any given day, but I hope it made you think. Most of all, I hope it made you thankful. I hope it made you thankful for Jesus who tore down the ultimate wall of separation and dividing line between us and God our Father. We're separated by sin from Him, and thanks to Jesus, we know through Jesus and the amazing grace that He gives us that we can live a unified relationship with our Creator. What I want to talk about today is some of the ways that we could respond to the first 3 episodes on race, but I also want to delve into kind of something beyond that. What I want to talk about is this: how should we deal with the abiding presence of sin? I think that's the real question. We have a cultural model and we have a Christian model. Kind of like in the previous episodes, we talked about how there's distinctions in worldviews. I want to talk about these kind of models for dealing with the abiding presence of sin in our world. So let me outline the cultural model we currently have in front of us really every day by way of example. As I record this, today is August 11th in the year of our Lord, 2021. And a big national news story is currently being revised. It began in a place that I've actually been many times, Coors Field in Denver, Colorado. It's where the Colorado Rockies play baseball, and I've been there many, many times. It's a beautiful ballpark if you've never been there. And every now and then, some beautiful baseballs even played there, and sometimes even by the Rockies. Every maybe 10 years or so. But most of the time, it's just a fun event to attend, especially on a summer evening in Denver. The humidity is literally 0%. The sun's setting over the mountains. It's beautiful. And because of that, people love Coors Field. Now, some of you might think that the national news story I'm talking about is a shooting that actually took place outside the field last week, but I'm not. The news story I'm talking about is that a fan was thought to have been shouting the N-word at a Marlins player while he was in the batter's box during the game in the 9th inning. It was heard in the background of the television broadcast, and consequently, the Rockies launched a full investigation after they released a condemnation. So they condemned this fan on social media, in the news, and then launched a full investigation, which might be considered backwards. But anyway, the social media world went wild. Everyone from players to announcers to the social media elite spread the story along with their condemnation of this man and his behavior. The only problem, as it turns out, is that he was not at all shouting the N-word, which is probably why no one around the man reacted during the game. All the reaction came after the game. He was, in fact, shouting the Rockies mascot and shouting his name, which happens to be Dinger. Now, again, I've been to Coors Field many times, and I can tell you that this mascot named Dinger does, in fact, exist. He's been there for a long time. And, in fact, if you watch the video and listen to the audio, I've done both, it's pretty obvious that's precisely what he's doing. He's not even looking at the batter in the batter's box. He's looking off to his right, where apparently Dinger was roaming the stands. So the question is, why did everyone rush to judgment? And the answer is because the cultural model for dealing with sin was being employed. And it goes like this. Number 1, keep your sin radar on high alert, but only for certain sins. Number 2, when you see it, call it out. Draw attention to it as loudly as possible. Number 3, condemn the person, punish the person, shame the person, hurt the person. Take as much as you can from the person. And number 4, move on. So let's look at that point by point. Keep your sin radar on high alert. Now, what's interesting is that applies not only to a very limited number of sins like racism, intolerance of any kind, hate speech with its ever-broadening definitions, but it always applies to others. In the cultural model, you aren't compelled to be on high alert for your own sin, but rather the sin of others. Secondly, when you see it, call it out loudly. Now, hidden beneath this is virtue signaling. We've talked about that in the past. Not only do I see the sin, in other words, I'm enlightened enough to know when it happens around me, when others around me may not, but I'm also brave enough to call it out, specifically and usually behind a keyboard and online. So brave. So all the condemnation for the man in question at Coors Field happened in print and online. Now, here's the thing I can tell you. I can assure you that if I were at Coors Field, again, like I've been many times, or any other ballpark, and a man near me was actually shouting the N-word at a player, not only would I have confronted the man in the moment, but I'm quite positive others would do the same. No one seemed to stop and think, I wonder why no one around the man seemed to be reacting to what he was saying. And here's why. Because we're being told a narrative and sold a narrative that everyone is racist. We're being told that we've made no progress and that fans yelling the N-word at players in Denver, Colorado is just as pervasive as it once was when Jackie Robinson played his first season for the Brooklyn Dodgers. Now, does it still happen? Of course it does, and it's sinful when it does. Does it happen as often as it once did? Of course it doesn't. The cultural model will continue to rush to conclusions because under it, we live with a level of sensitivity that is going to find racism everywhere we look all the time. Most of the time, I would say that his oversensitivity is not motivated by a genuine concern over the sin of racism. It's rather motivated by an overwhelming desire to appear righteous. Genuine concern doesn't typically manifest itself in the piling on we see on social media. Genuine concern manifests itself through one-on-one confrontation. But here's the thing. There isn't any media coverage of one-on-one confrontation. All the virtual pats on the back for your perpetual wokeness just don't exist when you meet with someone privately. Which leads me to the third point: condemn, punish, and shame. Maybe you remember the woman who made national news for calling the cops on a black man who was bird watching in Central Park. She actually lost her job over the incident, basically for describing the man as an African American. What it turned out to be, in my estimation, was two people vastly overreacting to their circumstances and being petty, but it got turned into so much more, and consequently she lost her job and was, widely shamed on social media. Something the man came out later saying he thought shouldn't have happened to her. But it was too late, the damage was done. And this is the point of cancel culture: to punish with no hope for redemption, all penance, no restoration. Which leads to the final point: move on. Stay on the lookout for the next person to attack in hopes of ridding the world of all the sin that you are so deeply passionate about. It's a reckoning, a shock and awe campaign that marches on with a trail of bodies in its wake. And this model is steeped in hypocrisy. Plays out in many ways. I could name some high-level elected officials in our country that make anti-Semitic remarks repeatedly, openly, and seemingly without a moment of pause. This goes widely unnoticed and unpunished for many reasons. Currently, with COVID remaining in the headlines, masking being once again a huge point of argument for millions of people, we have government officials who are quick to condemn Sturgis biker rallies but have nothing to say about Lollapalooza. Why? Well, because the cultural model only operates with fingers pointed at those that you perceive to be the unrighteous and takes for granted that you and those who agree with you are a part of the righteous. And consider vaccinations. If you were to pay attention to what the media is telling you, it is mostly white evangelical Christians in the Midwest and South that are refusing to be vaccinated. That's just factually not true. The people who are refusing to be vaccinated the most happen to be a lot of minorities. If you look at New York City alone, the latest stats I heard, 31% of African Americans in New York City were vaccinated. A little higher level amongst Hispanics, a little higher level amongst white people. The highest number of people vaccinated in New York City are Asians. And so with the vaccine passport that's being proposed in New York City, effectively, diners and restaurants and gyms are going to close their doors to a vast number of minorities because of their vaccination status. There is a narrative. So what's disconcerting to me is the amount of Christians I see participating in the utterly irredeemable cultural model. Because there's no grace, there's no gospel, there's no Jesus. In this model, I see so many Christians happy to be a part of it, and it's sad and disappointing. So here's the question. Is this what Jesus modeled for us? Well, I'll let you decide. Here are his words in Matthew 7. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use it, it will be measured to you. So why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your own eye, when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you'll see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Now, here's the thing. Jesus isn't telling us to ignore sin. In fact, he's not telling us to ignore sin in other people. What is he telling us to do? Well, he's telling us to first address the sin that we ourselves are struggling with. If we're going to have a high radar for sin, a heightened sensitivity for it, it needs to be strongest in regard to locating, identifying, and addressing the sin in our own hearts. So when we've demonstrated that we care about our own sin, then we can help our brothers out. That just makes sense, doesn't it? You ever been confronted by someone who, in your estimation, had absolutely no moral ground to stand on? It's really not effective, is it? See, our cultural model demands that you pretend to be okay when you're not okay, and then, on top of that, seek and destroy all the sinners around you. See, Jesus' model says you better be paying attention to your own sin first. Well, how about loving? Does the cultural model sound anything like this famous chapter of the Bible that's often read at weddings but applies well beyond marriage in 1 Corinthians 13? If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels but do not have love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and knowledge, and if I have faith that can move mountains but do not have love, I'm nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient, love is kind, it doesn't envy, it doesn't boast, it's not proud, doesn't dishonor others, it's not self-seeking, it's not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. So ask yourself this question. I think this is a really good question to ask, if you're familiar with the story. What if the woman caught in the act of adultery had been caught in the act of racism? Are you aware of the story? In the cultural model of our day, I'm afraid a lot of Christians would join in the stone throwing. It shocked people that Jesus didn't want to punish, but instead wanted to restore the woman caught in the act of adultery. And I dare say that it shocks people that Jesus' desire is the same for racists, just like it is for, well, all sinners. You probably know John 3:16, but it's important to memorize the next verse as well. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. So if God were playing by the rules of our culture, we'd all be destined for hell. No one could have seen our sin more clearly than God. No one had a right to call out our sin and condemn all of us more than God. We're all certainly sinners who've fallen desperately short of God's glory. Yet, he didn't punish us and move on, which he had every right to do. He, by punishing his own Son instead of us, moved in. He didn't move on. He moved in. He came toward us instead of turning away from us. And as Christians who've been forgiven for ugly, deep, and pervasive sin, we're commanded to live like it, and we're called to love like it. Well, hey, that wraps up this episode of Locker Room. Thanks for joining us, and we will catch you next time.